Let's take a brief look at what you're doing this week. This is week 2, and we're looking at maintaining viable populations in captivity. Your learning materials are here. You'll read this chapter from Frankham, which is on genetics and extinction, and this one talks about the extinction vortex. There's also a handout on Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So if you're not clear about Hardy-Weinberg and some of the assumptions and how that model is used to model populations, you'll want to take a look at this handout. There are also some sections from the Ballou chapters that talk about managing populations and preserving both demographic and genetic diversity. In addition, you have a podcast. If you do the drop down here on the podcast, you can read the transcript. One of your first assignments is to find purpose for your study. So this is going to feed into your class project. If you go back and look at that chapter from Ballou, they talk about defining purpose, goals, and targets. There's sort of 3 different levels that we're looking at here. What they want you to do in this first post is a very broad objective, which is the purpose of your program. Later, you'll get into more quantifiable goals and the more technical aspects of how you're going to accomplish it. Here, you want to establish what that overall purpose is. It's also telling you to go back and read through the course project, because this is going to feed into that course project. You're going to select the species that you want to focus on. In your initial posts for this week, you're going to post an introduction of the species, and you're also going to describe the purpose for your captive population for this course project. You also want to discuss the pros and cons for some of the different objectives. Make sure that you address issues that are discussed in the Ballou reading. Talk a little bit about probability of extinction, inbreeding, how breeding individuals might be available for your captive population. Can the zoo accommodate this captive population? Write this message to your zoo director. You're trying to convince them that this is a valid plan. Make sure that in this plan that you put together, you also discuss how you plan on maintaining a goal of 90% heterozygosity for the next 100 years in your population. Provide at least one citation of a peer-reviewed source in APA format. So remember, a peer-reviewed source is a journal article in a scientific journal. It has been peer-reviewed. In this case, it's not necessarily saying it has to be a research article. It could be a review article. It could be a research article. But it can't be a chapter from a book. It can't be a website. It has to be from a peer-reviewed journal. In your response to this week's discussion, you're going to reply to 2 of your peers' posts. Respond as though you are the director that they sent this to. You're going to look at their proposal. You're going to include one positive thing that the program could do for the zoo and one negative thing, maybe something that would be a little bit of a challenge to overcome. Look at the course project as you are putting this discussion post together. In the assignment for week 2, you're going to run a simulation. You're going to use that Hardy-Weinberg modeling to look at the effects of population size on populations. Make sure you take a look at the questions that you're going to need to answer. So rather than jumping straight into the simulation program, first take a look at what you're going to need to do in there so that you make sure that you don't have to go back and redo something. It's asking you to essentially pick 2 scenarios, a large population and a small population. Try to make it something that is applicable to the species that you are going to work with. You're going to compare a small and a large population. You're going to justify why you would pick those sizes for your population. Then you're going to run this simulation. It's going to ask you to describe what happened. The information that you're going to describe is going to be on the right-hand side of the graph. So let's take a look at that. It's telling us to change the number of populations to 1, leave everything else the same. We're going to say number of populations is 1. I'll just start off with the smallest one. We're going to say 5, and we're going to hit go. What we're seeing in our graphs is this is looking at allele frequencies. Allele A1 is in orange, the allele A2 is in green. This is what the allele frequency would look like if the population was an infinite size. And that's what Hardy-Weinberg is based on. So in an infinite population, whatever allele frequencies you start with, that's what will remain. That's the idea of no evolution. Allele frequencies haven't changed. If allele frequencies change, we have evolution. So Hardy-Weinberg essentially set up these conditions for which evolution did not occur. In Hardy-Weinberg, one of the assumptions is infinite population size. If I start to decrease the population size, I'm going to encounter something called genetic drift, where the allele frequencies will sort of randomly fluctuate. And so what they're finding here is in this one population, they started to fluctuate, and then very quickly, after about 20 generations, the allele A1 became fixed. It has a frequency of 1, so it's the only allele in the population now, and this A2 came to 0. It's lost. A1 was fixed, A2 was lost. I don't know why this says A1 over here. That should say A2. A2 was lost. It happened in about 17 generations. There were no populations where A1 was lost because we only had one population. Down here is looking at your genotype frequency. We have homozygous A1, your heterozygotes, and your homozygous A2s. Since A1 became fixed, we can see over time the A1 genotype becomes fixed because it's the only allele in the population. Then they're going to ask you to do it for 5, compare that with what happened when you only ran 1, what's the difference, and then do the same thing for populations with larger numbers. In your final report, in addition to sharing your answers from 1 through 5 up here, make sure you also address these questions. So how might this information you just got from running this simulation impact your thinking about your own population? Make sure you take a look at the grading rubric for all assignments, and this is here below. Your second assignment for week 2 has you think about this extinction vortex, which was described in the Frankum chapter. Think of the extinction vortex as sort of a snowball. And so you might have one variable that is pushing extinction, but because of that, other variables start to come in and escalate that rate of extinction. This chapter talks about these 3 different things that sort of intermingle to create that extinction vortex. Think about how that's going to impact your species for your course project. Make sure that you hit on at least 3 of the interconnected points that the Frankum chapter makes. So what is the relationship between these 3 interacting factors in putting populations at risk of extinction? Include at least one peer-reviewed source. It can include the Frankum chapter, but it can also include other citations. Now, if you include material from the Frankum chapter, definitely make sure that you cite it, but if you also include something else, you want to cite that as well. So you always want to cite anything that you use, but you only want to include in your citations things that you actually cite in the text. So don't forget that you need both in-text citations, meaning at the end of a sentence in your essay, and you want your in citations in a reference section. If you're not clear about that, please go back to the video from week 1 on finding sources and citing. You have your rubric down below. So that is everything that you're doing for week 2. If you have any questions, please let me know.